Story there by Kamal Georges. My apologies. Good morning, Kamal. Joining us on set, Carolyn C. Bechan. Mrs. C. Bechan, there was a couple articles in the media over the last couple of days which suggest that you may not have been too pleased with the Prime Minister's silence. Now, first I have to ask if there's any truth to the story, because Mr. Ramadan just clarified a story that was published in one of the newspapers. Is there any truth to that story? And now, are you satisfied with the explanation given by the Prime Minister and her statements issued yesterday?
First of all, we do not control headlines, right? So let me start there by saying that if you look at the context of that article, what I was doing was actually supporting the political leader of the Congress of the People, Mr. Ramadan's call for the lifting of the veil of collective cabinet responsibility. It was the COP's view that in light of what has happened, that there was a need for full disclosure of the facts so that we can determine if there was any culpability or if there was any wrongdoing or bad intent. In fact, what happened is that by us calling for that, we were saying that, listen, collective cabinet responsibility must not ever or should not or ought not to overshadow public accountability to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's in that context that I was saying that. Now, this thing about let's move on. My issue is that we needed to have that full disclosure. We needed to have the assessment of the facts. And I compliment the Prime Minister for taking the time out to do so. She did break her silence. She reviewed the facts. She investigated. She actually had meetings with, including the Chief Justice and the DPP, as indicated in her statement. And based on those facts, she was able to determine that there was evidence on the part that Mr. Volney actually misled the Cabinet and the Parliament.
Are you satisfied with the response of firing Mr. Volney? And I'm also going to ask this in the context of an editorial. Even if that is so, however, Mr. Ramlogan's failure to detect this misfeasance plus his aggressive defense of the so-called error should disqualify him from continuing in this important office. Before we go to Mr. Ramlogan, are you satisfied that the firing will end this controversy?
Well, I hardly imagine that everybody will be totally satisfied. What I can say that this is a dramatic departure from the way the old paradigm was. This is, as Caroline has pointed out, the lifting of the veil of cabinet confidentiality, which is novel to an environment like this. So we congratulate that, yes. In terms of Mr. Ramlogan, if you know him, he cannot help but be aggressive in anything that he's defending. He is a warrior, if I may put it like that. And sometimes he goes a little bit across the line, In terms of whether he was able to detect it, I can't speak to that. That's a matter you're best placed before him. But on the basis of his passionate defense, that's a personal trait of the man. And I will not pass judgment on him on
Do you support Mr. Ramlogan in his position as Attorney General after all of this that has happened, all has transpired, the confidence in the LRC, the systems, the processes in place? Now, you must know that the confidence has been shaken a bit following this.
It would be improper for me to comment on any colleague publicly as to their performance. What I can say is I had known Mr. Ramlogan for many years before, and in private practice he has been a champion of the people, fighting for rights. And one cannot just pass judgment on one issue, but look at the totality of what a person does.
The confidence in the LRC and the processes of governance and government. How can we have confidence in a committee that is supposed to put things and then we realize that what came back was totally different?
Well, there you go. That is why it was necessary for us to come to the public and indicate that the LRC did its duty to the highest level it was required. And the LRC, and I speak as chairman, but I represent the entire committee, which are members of cabinet, technocrats, legal officers, and that nothing inappropriate or wrong was committed by the LRC. We kept to our standards. And therefore, we may now need to look at the issue of amendments coming on the floor so that the policy is that the highest lawmaking body is the Parliament itself, which is far higher than the LRC. But we saw then that in the moment, and the kind of rush situation that we deal with regularly in the Parliament, we have to really reflect upon that. Late night sittings. I have been critical of that because we need the very best all the time in the Parliament, at the upper and lower house. So these are the structural issues that we need to attend to ensure that things like these do not go through, so that we have a more, I shouldn't say casual, no, but a more mature view of every word in every bit of law that we pass.
What was the atmosphere like in yesterday's cabinet meeting? Was it a unanimous decision for the dismissal?
Yes, there was, and I think after the Prime Minister had done her investigation and came back to the Cabinet and was able to reveal the facts, members of Cabinet felt that, they were misled and therefore agreed with the decision to dismiss Mr. Volney.
Ms. Ramna, before we wrap this interview, in private practice, you're a criminal attorney. You know the seriousness of the problems that plague the judicial system in this country. How are we really going to move forward? Most people look at this as seeing it was yet another example by the political directorate to reinforce the views that there's a two-tier justice system. A lot of things were being said on the ground. How are we now going to move forward, really and truly, with the preliminary inquiries, with this bill, and with all that has happened with the Justice Ministry?
Well, where we started off, on the best of intentions, we must continue along that route. The removal of preliminary inquiries, I think, is a huge movement, because as a criminal practicing lawyer, I would tell you that many cases took years in a preliminary inquiry stage, at the end of which the inevitable comes, you get committed to stand trial, then you have to wait several more years. If we remove that first part, trials will be speeded up. So you have people, justice that comes too late. It has no effect on those who are willing to commit crime. And therefore it's a two-pronged approach. One, the reduction of crime, because if you know you're going to first of all be caught, arrested, prosecuted, and convicted, you're less likely to do it. And if you know that you're going to get it quicker, that will also contribute to a reduction in crime. The backlog is enormous.
So then how are we going to, we see the population, the reaction, there's always a suspicion that this system is open to a little bit of gray areas. And there may be loopholes.
That is life, and that is why in every process, as you start, and these loopholes come up, realize how quickly it was that this Parliament reconvened to amend that.
Will we see this coming back in its original form, the same 10 years? What are the changes that you will recommend?
What I would recommend.
As head of the LRC.
Yeah, well, in terms of the number, you've heard the report, right? In terms of the number of cases it would actually have dealt with, they're minimal. So what I would really want to focus on now is getting the infrastructure in place to ensure that the new system starts in early next year, and that we really do have trials within months rather than years.
Your closing comments, Ms. Ipsad Bechan.
Well, I think that what has happened here is very important for us to understand. Compared to last administrations, we saw the issue of lifting collective cabinet responsibility. We saw where, in fact, Mr. Ramadan and I did apologize to the nation. We have had an apology by the Prime Minister of this country, something I think that never would have happened before. So I think this is a government showing the change that we want, that the people ask for.
So let me just say that the COP's position has always been about this, about moving from where we were to the place we want to be. We are a first world nation waiting to happen, and the standards that are required come incrementally sometimes, but sometimes dramatically in a case like this. And that is our position from beginning to end. We are consistent on that. We need to lift our standards.
And we must never forget the expectations of the people of Trinidad and Tobago are getting greater and greater as we approach First World Nation status.
Was the Prime Minister pressured to make this decision? If the story didn't break in the media, what would have been the fate today?
Well, I don't want to speculate. What I do know, the hand of God plays in everything, and we must always be aware of that. No ill will be unattended to. It may not come up at a relevant time, but it will always come up. That's something I learned as a child. So always beware of the hand of God. So, Trinidad and Tobago, let us take that lesson, that nothing in the dark will not come to light. It will.
Everything that's in the dark will definitely come to light. I'm Hema Rhymes. Now take a very short break. When we come back, political analyst Hamid Ghani and attorney at law Gregory Delson, they weigh in on what has transpired over the last 24 hours. Stay with us. Volney fire, the major story on the political landscape. Dr. Ghani, I'm convinced there's never a dull moment whenever you're scheduled to come in on set. Really and truly, yesterday the Prime Minister held a press conference. Good precedent, Madam Prime Minister. Government ministers have been fired by Prime Ministers before, but this is the first time in Trinidad and Tobago's political history that a minister has been fired over an issue which aroused widespread and vehement public disapproval. Starting with Dr. Eric Williams, the best response for prime ministers has simply to shift errant ministers to other portfolios and even give them an ambassadorship. Well, that's a reward we seem to be getting these days. Under the NAR regime, Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson fired Bastia Pandey and his cabinet colleagues not over principle, but because of a political fallout within the coalition. Interesting times. Section 34 fiasco continues. Now the healing will move on. Dr. Ghani, your thoughts?
Well, morning, Hema. I think that the Prime Minister had to lay it all out for the public yesterday because there are aspects of this that would not be in the public domain. I mean, the Parliament aspect of this is in the public domain. There's a Parliament channel, there's Hansard, and therefore one can see everything that played out in respect of the Parliament. So I think in her statement she made it quite clear that there was a crossbench support situation for the legislation and all that it had, but the workings inside the cabinet would not be known to the public, and I think that is what people really wanted to get at. So the early proclamation issue, I think, was the big issue. Why did it happen? And based on what she has provided to us, it appeared as though the cabinet was led to believe that the Chief Justice and the DPP were in agreement with early proclamation, and that her subsequent investigation has revealed that that was not the case, and then she took action to address the situation.
Delson, your thoughts? Well, Section 34 fallout continues. The LRC, the Attorney General, the Minister of Justice, the DPP, and the Chief Justice, now the Prime Minister.
I don't think, with the greatest respect to a lot of people who have come before me, I do not think the matter has been adequately explained. What has been explained to the country is a process, but the content of that process discloses something completely different from the conclusions being put forward in the public domain. When you look at the cabinet note that the Prime Minister is relying on to say that Justice Volney misled the cabinet note has nothing to do with Section 34. It says nothing about Section 34. It does not introduce Section 34 as an issue. The cabinet note, which is what informs the cabinet decision, stated that proclamation of the act was necessary in order to provide a basis to amend the Supreme Court of Judicature Act to allow the appointment of 8 masters of the court.
Right.
That has nothing to do with Section 34. Section 34 was a general amnesty to all persons who had been charged more than 10 years after any crime had been committed that had not been referred to in Schedule 6. So it has nothing to do with the appointment of masters. So whatever misleading that Justice Volney did, he didn't do it in relation to Section 34.
If I go with what you're saying, would you say that Volney is now the fall guy for